Yeah. Hey guys, all right, just before the show starts, I wanted to let you guys know that my fight against cancel culture is still happening. Please go to the description below. There's a link titled Support My Fight Against Cancel Culture. If you want to help my fight, please consider giving a bit of a donation. All the information is in that link. With that being said, enjoy the show.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Let's Get Real. Tonight's show is about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. So tonight we'll be talking about education, which is the world that I come from, and we'll be discussing the way that education has increasingly become commercialized. And to talk to us a bit more about that, I'll be talking to a very special guest who's also very near and dear to my heart. She's my sister, Professor Harley from the University of Johannesburg. Hi, Cherise. Welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So I thought that to just kick off the conversation, just so that people have a sense of your background and where you come from and your expertise, you could just give us a bit of your story and what you've done as an academic and where you are right now.
Sure. I kind of just landed in academia, to be honest. I just loved learning. That was what it came down to, and I didn't want to stop. And so at some point, I wasn't entirely sure what to continue studying, and I was sitting in the mathematical sciences at that stage. And eventually, I decided that I wanted to go the computational applied maths route, which is what I did. And at that stage, I became an academic at the University of the Witwatersrand, so Wits University, which is where I was for about a decade. I teach in the computational mathematical sciences, so numerical methods. That's my research field as well, though my research field has changed with time, specifically because there tend to be trends in research as things develop. I've traveled extensively, gone to many different kinds of institutes, done research visits at Oxford University, Texas A&M as a Fulbright scholar. So I've been in quite a few educational environments as well, which is always very exciting and gives you a completely new perspective on basically on the world that you're living in, and that it's not just in one country. And then after being at Wits for a while, I went into industry, worked as a data scientist. And now I'm in the Faculty of Engineering at University of Johannesburg, where they've got a very strong push for technologies in the fourth industrial revolution. So it's exciting.
Okay. Well, that's cool. So clearly you have the expertise to be talking on this topic, especially since you've been in different educational contexts as well. So to start us off, I think I just want to clarify a couple of things. Firstly, when we're talking about commercialization of education, we're not speaking about this idea of marketing education. So what Sharice and I will be discussing is not about this issue of universities marketing themselves in the sense that they advertise their services. What we're talking about is something much more integral to the functioning of the university in terms of its internal approach to how it navigates the educational territory. So we'll get into that in a moment. But I thought that what we'd first like to clarify, because I assume that many people would think that because I'm taking issue or at least bringing up for discussion the idea that the business model, or at least a form of capitalism, doesn't work in education, that it must be because I'm anti-capitalist or because Sharice is anti-capitalist. And from my side, I'm not anti-capitalist. I am a capitalist. I do believe that free market system is the best economic system. But the point of this show is to call into question whether it is the best system for an educational context. Sharice, I just wondered if you want to just weigh in on your viewpoint.
Oh, what you said. Exactly what you said.
So you're not anti-capitalist, perfectly happy with capitalism, economic system. Okay, so we're basically scrutinizing whether that approach should be applied in educational system. The next thing I thought we should clarify before we get to the nitty-gritty of the conversation is what the purpose of a university is, because I think that there are a lot of misconceptions around what a university is supposed to achieve. And it's become increasingly distorted as we've seen more and more of the leftist ideology take over. So, Shrees, from your perspective, what is the purpose of a university?
So, I mean, historically, depending on whether you're looking at a more Western background or not, these were basically communities of teachers, of scholars. They were interested in learning. And the idea was literally to do exactly that in the specialist areas, to specialize at quite a high level. It wasn't that they excluded students. It wasn't just a bunch of old white men sitting in a corner and, it was engagement. It was scholarly engagement, but it was at a high level. That's specifically what made it stand out. And often that's exactly why they got their funding, was because the kind of research that they were doing, the kind of work they were doing, the intellectual development that was happening was specialized and ended up becoming quite meaningful. So in my mind, it's for the intellectual elite. That is what it's for. Not the elite in terms of background, in terms of anything else. It is literally designed a university for the intellectual elite, which is exactly why that's where our doctors come from. It's where our lawyers come from. It's where our scientists come from. Those are individuals that are supposedly, in my mind, in the minority. So that's the origin comes more from that. And so that's basically informed my view of a university.
Yeah. And would you agree that as I don't know if I can put an exact time limit on it, but increasingly in the last, 5 to 7 years or so, we've seen, at least in this country, it's been for longer than that, but we've seen even in the West, this idea that universities are there to educate the masses. And furthermore, universities are now there to further social justice causes. So essentially, the university has become a politicized space in a way that never had been previously, because the whole point of a university was to allow all kinds of thinking to flourish, precisely because it was the way of getting the elite or getting the best of the best to be as good as they could be, was to not put any limitations on what they could and could not think about and write about.
It was meant to be neutral ground. It was the place where you came with any and every idea and you could interrogate it no matter who you were. That's the fundamental idea, and that's the thing that drew me to the university, was the fact that it was the first place where I could see intellectuals argue with each other and then walk away as friends. And I loved that, because I felt that was a home for me. But now it's mass production. It's exactly what you're saying. It is focused on educating the masses in a manner that can very easily lend itself towards becoming basically mass producing one kind of individual. So you're basically replicating. You're not setting up a system, especially if you just think of something as simple as a classroom structure. So you have a class of 10 students, which is what my tutorials were like. You've got 10 people, 10 individuals thinking, talking, engaging. If you have a class of 600, that's not happening. It's just not feasible for that kind of engagement to happen. What will happen, if you're lucky, is that a few individuals will be brave enough or just engaged enough to actually engage with each other, with the lecturer. And that's what you're losing. So what happens is that uniformity has now become the name of the game. And that for me is sad. The most exciting environments I've been in is where you have a group of individuals that don't agree. And now they have to discuss this. They have to get through it. They have to find a way to move forward on either solving a problem or an issue, whatever it might be. So yeah, very much. It's now become focused on as a mass education system, which is not what it was designed for. It's not the manner in which academics function doesn't lend itself towards that. And I mean, there are reasons why I think this has happened, but yeah.
I think what's important for us to address is, I know that many people would say, well, of course you're in support of a kind of elitism because you fall within that category. You are part of that elite. Of course, you're going to support the existence of something that you are a part of because you benefit from it. But I think it's important for us to clarify why is that elite aspect of society, why is that important for the sake of that entire society, not just for those people who happen to fall in that category. So what does that elite group do that actually enhances the quality of life for everyone?
Well, let me put it to you this way. If I'm going to have a heart attack, I'm really hoping I have a specialist doctor to help me out. The kind of training there's the elite that we're talking about. It's not a favored word for many reasons, but it's the best word that I can think of. Those specialists that we're referring to are individuals who have often put in up to 10 years of study behind being able to perform at an intellectual, psychological, and emotional level that is not easy for the majority of people. I could not do what a doctor does. I couldn't do what a lawyer does. That's the reality. So I might in some way fall within that class, but at the same time, it's not the structure where you just it's like an automatic that if you are at a university, you fall within that class. Often the elite are those that leave the university. They are the ones that go into society. They drive it forward. They're the individuals that find out how do you do a heart transplant. Those are the individuals that try and change a society if they come from social sciences or political sciences. Those are the people that see how can we take society as a unit and move it forward, make things better, basically push those frontiers. Those are the people that we're talking about. But what for me is sad is that when you speak about that component, there's an immediate assumption that somehow every other form of education, every other individual that is something else is less than, which in my mind is ridiculous. I can tell you now, when my fridge breaks or when my geyser breaks, I'm not going to call the doctor. Okay, I'm going to call someone who's a specialist in their own right and who, in my mind, has just as much respectability in any society as a doctor does. It's just that the kind of education required, the background, the experience, and hence how it is that you're contributing to society is different. But it doesn't mean you don't. And it's exactly, I think, because we've lost that perspective that nurses, policemen, teachers are not respected to the extent that they should be. I mean, those are individuals that, you want to speak about, let's use a car as an analogy, and you've got your amazing Bluetooth setup and you've got your phone and it looks all snazzy. So you've got the specialized aspect. But the cogs in the wheels, the thing that makes that machine move forward, those individuals often are the fundamental backbone of your society. And they're just as important. They just serve a different purpose. And so what they need to be specialists in their own right is different. They don't necessarily need a university. That's all that this comes down to for me.
And also in industry, we love talking about this buzzword of innovation and, going beyond limits and all this nonsense. But we don't actually live it out, because if we actually believe that, then we would support an elite being developed to the nth degree so that they could actually move society forward and could actually come up with solutions.
Yes.
And I think this is also probably the best time to just talk about what you've mentioned, is that we've, in a sense, put this idea of going to university on a pedestal. The government has played an enormously important role in convincing masses that the only education worth having is a university education, when in fact, firstly, that's not feasible. Secondly, it's not true, because, like you say, for most people, that's not what a university is built for, and that is not where they will thrive. In fact, it's probably where it will destroy any potential they had to be a productive member of the society, where they could actually feel like they're contributing and could actually flourish. And so I don't know if everyone's aware of this, so I'm going to just say this, but in 1994, both my Sharice and I, our parents were lecturers at the Johannesburg College of Education, and post 94, all the colleges were closed down. This includes the TVET colleges that were responsible for artisanal training, for training people in manufacturing, all of those crucial skills, because the government was selling to people the idea that everyone could now become part of the knowledge economy. So basically, everyone would now have the opportunity to go to university. And in so doing, we've lost out on so many skills, and which is also why our economy is doing so poorly, because for so many years, there wasn't any of that training taking place. The education colleges became part of the universities, but again, those standards just kept deteriorating. So people who would go into foundation phase education was shocking, and our parents, we were old enough to know that those students were shocking back in 94. So what they're like now, I don't even want to imagine. And it's precisely because the government also didn't seem to understand what the purpose of a university was, and clearly could not deliver, because it's also why we've had the emergence of Trees Must Fall, is that clearly it was something they could not deliver on. And whenever universities would push back and say, well, we can't take more students, like Sharice was saying, because we don't have the space, so we can't give them the attention they should be getting, the government would just say, well, you have to take them. There's nowhere else for them to go. And so this has compounded the issue to a point now where universities have struggled for so long that they've had to come up with a lot of survival mechanisms about that. Now we talk about the commercialization issue. So I thought probably the best way for us to approach the respects in which universities have become like companies, so essentially they are following the model of company now, is we would sort of just map on what are the spheres you have in a company, and how are universities actually mimicking that in a very destructive way. So first of all, in a company, you always have the bureaucratic layer. So those are the administrative people that have to take charge of the company's regulations and have to enforce all kinds of, I mean, in the States, you'd have sort of like, they call them diversity officers for people and things like that. And in universities, we've seen an enormous increase in the number of admin staff, so much so that they're starting to exceed the number of lecturers that you have at the university. I don't know if you wanted to speak on that point, please.
So yeah, unfortunately, I mean, I've been at different universities and kind of seen a large portion of the shift that's transpired, and where it used to be an environment where I wouldn't say the power, but I think where the driving force was the faculty members. It was the academics. It was the individuals that were teaching. It was the individuals that were doing research, that were trying to drive innovation in a variety of capacities and spheres. With that driving force suddenly just kind of taking a step back, and instead we've seen much stronger bureaucratic influence, much stronger administrative influence, where decisions that are fundamentally meant to be made based upon educational principles are being made for bureaucratic reasons. They're not being made with a vision of a university and in terms of its identity. They're not being made just in terms of the practical requirements of providing quality education. They're not being made with the guiding principles of how do you create critical thinkers, how do you push for innovation, how do you get individuals to do more than they thought they could. And I know that the impact that has had on our students, because I've seen it. I've seen how students that, when I've had them in the right environment with enough attention from the right individuals, go from being average to being excellent, because they just needed assistance. And they were talented. You could see they were talented, but they just needed a little bit of help. Whereas when you're looking at, when there's a structure where you've got a system of bums on seats, i.e. let's get many in, it's not, you lose so many of them. So many students slip through the cracks. Talented students, intelligent students, for a variety of reasons. It's not just because there isn't enough funding. It's because sometimes it's overwhelming and they need someone to talk to. And you as an academic would love to be that person to be there for them a lot of the time. But there's a queue of 300 students outside your office trying to get notes. So the quality education that you would want to deliver, you literally just can't. Just because now the decisions that would completely influence what's happening in your classroom is being made by somebody who's an administrator, in essence, who's a manager. It's, you literally have no power to say, I cannot take more students. You don't have that power. So even though you know in your field, you're already at maximum capacity, if you get told to take more students into your classroom, then you have to. And I'm not even speaking about infrastructural issues or issues with getting enough equipment and getting enough textbooks and everything. I'm literally just speaking about what is educationally required for good quality education. And we find it's extremely frustrating.
And this is the thing, like with administrators, I mean, they don't have necessarily the same mandate that lecturers have, because they're not there to educate. They are there to see that certain boxes are ticked and certain regulations are followed. But they don't have the background in education to understand what is educationally sound. So I'll mention another incident that's it's related, where I mentioned this to you as well, Joe, where Jordan Peterson, when he came out with Bill C6 against Bill C16, and one of his arguments is that this was the bill that said that it was legally required for someone to transgender person by their pronouns. And he said one of the things is that if you put this in the hands of administrators of any bureaucratic system, they will misinterpret it and they will abuse it because they don't know how to use it. And everyone said he's exaggerating, he's just being paranoid. And not 3-4 months later, Lindsay Shepherd was being held up on charges based on that bill, because she went into a classroom and showed both sides of the debate, where Jordan Peterson was debating this bill against someone else. And she was told that what she should have done was to frame what Jordan Peterson was saying as essentially problematic. So instead of taking a neutral position, she should have indicated to the students that Jordan Peterson's view was the wrong one. And those administrators abused that policy so that they could get at her. And this is the point. This is why the idea, the very notion that more funding would go towards employing administrators rather than the people who are actually doing the educating seems absolutely absurd. And that's obviously where you start detecting that there's a distinct power shift, where if you've got most of the administrators with the power, then lecturers are no longer the authority in their own classroom, and the students know that. They know that the lecturer is not the final say. Have you experienced that as well, where students have essentially made it clear to you that they know that you don't have power?
Well, they assumed that was the case. They just didn't know me well enough. I had a first-year student come up to me. I still remember it so clearly because I started laughing. And he came to me and he said to me, listen, so if all of us fail your test, are you going to shift the curve? So basically, if all of us fail, you're going to push all of our marks up, right? And I started laughing because I thought it was very funny. I still do. And I said to him, no. I said, if all of you fail, that'll be your mark. And he just was taken aback, did not know what to say. And I just thought to myself, I should be the one that's taken aback at your audacity for actually saying that to me. That you are asking me to diminish the quality of your education, especially when I know you can do better. And the class did.
In my year, could you imagine speaking like that to a lecturer? Could you imagine saying that to a lecturer? that you're basically threatening them and saying, I will make sure. And what you just mentioned, that did happen to me when I was teaching. That's exactly what they did. They all went and failed, and I was put under pressure to boost their marks, and I said no. And then I was told by the head of the department they were just going to go over my head and do it anyway. So in that instance, I knew that even though I said no, it's not up to me. Eventually, it'll just be like, well, it's going to happen whether you want it or not. And that's the point at which you have absolutely no power in your own classroom. So,
well, because the bureaucratic layers are increasing, right? So it was your classroom, and then probably like a meeting that would basically be 4 marks would be loaded up, for instance. Now the amount of bureaucratic meetings that happen between what happens in your classroom and the final mark that gets released is insane. The amount of basically checks and balances it goes through before the mark actually leaves the system and gets given to the student is it's amazing. And sometimes for good reason. There are times when there are good reasons, but a lot of the time it's not that. And when it's not managed by academics, it can go horribly wrong, because then it's a bean counting exercise, right? So for instance, if you have in certain subjects, if you're sitting on a 49, we know that we basically need to make sure that the student doesn't by accident pass, because we know that in that subject area, it's such a strong component and it supports so many other subject areas that we need to make sure the student's strong enough. Otherwise, they'll just fail more rather than actually doing well. But when you've got an administrator looking at a 49, they're saying, oh, well, we can just condone to 50. You see, and so this is where it's such you literally do need that person that was in the classroom and knows the student's background and how they've performed in every single assessment. And that's what academics do. They literally sit for every student. If you have got a borderline mark, and they go through every assessment to see whether it would be good for you to continue or whether it wouldn't be good for you. And then they assess whether they should condone or not, for instance. So it's an extremely lengthy process. The end of the year, so in South Africa, in our case, when it's marks time, it's a lot of work. And it's a lot of work on the part of the academics, the individuals that were in the classrooms, if it's done properly. But when that gets taken away from the academic, you may as well set up an automated process on a computer. It's the same thing. When you have nobody that understands what they're looking at and the context of it, you may as well just have it run through an Excel spreadsheet. It makes no difference.
I think what students also, especially with the Trans4 movement, I think what students also don't see is they don't see all the work academics have to put into assessing them, making decisions that would benefit them in the long term. And if you don't have someone who's informed in terms of what is educationally sound in that position, then you essentially have no one looking out for your well-being. And I think that students don't ever see that aspect of what's going on. They see lecturers as just the person who is, ruthless or cutthroat and just, gives marks willy-nilly, apparently, and has no sort of investment in the people that they're teaching.
Look, in every system, there are issues. And in every system, there are people who should not be there. There are academics that are not good academics. That's how the world works. In any sphere, you will find people that are not good at what they do and they're not as invested. But I can tell you, I have met many academics, and the majority of the individuals I've known are extremely invested. I've seen top professors that literally if you understood in academic realms how highly they are regarded in terms of their research, you would be so scared to say anything in their classroom. But that person will then go home for the entire weekend and spend 2 hours per essay marking their student stuff at first year level, because that's how much it matters to them. That is how much they believe in education. And yes, they are cutthroat and they can be brutal, but that's their job. That's exactly what they're there for. It's not just, an education is not just an intellectual development. It's an emotional and psychological development. And I think that's one of the things that's often overlooked. And we now coined this whole student experience and express that in some way, but it's not, in my mind, it's not exactly the same thing. The emotional and psychological development you go through is specifically because you are pushing back against intellectuals. So you're pushing back against your peers when you guys are arguing over problems. You're pushing back against an academic who is just being full of nonsense that day and is just annoying you because, you know what, they don't make any sense and you just don't understand why they don't make sense. You're pushing back against a professor that has a terrible accent and they're from Russia and you have no idea what they're saying. But in every unusual experience that you're having at university, you are developing what we call in industry soft skills. You are developing the skills to manage a situation that is unusual, that is different. You're having to do it because the intellectual material is new, it's difficult. You're having to do it because this personality is completely different to what you're used to. The psychological stress is there for a variety of different reasons. But those components combined is what makes you get that education. It's not, it's the same notion of how is it that you get a diamond? Extreme pressure, same concept. The students that have excelled, that have done well, that have earned their degrees, it was not easy. If you're an educational process and it's easy, you're doing it wrong. I suffered when I studied. It was hard. It was horrible. I thought I was going to either break someone else. Many times, many times. And the idea that you're the only student who's finding it rough, no, you're not. You really aren't. And as rough as you think you're having it, I can guarantee you some of the stories I've heard, there's somebody who's got it rougher. It's amazing what people have had to go through. But when they get that education, because of all of these different kinds of components, the value it has is immeasurable.
Yeah, and now you're mentioning the student experience, which is the other part of the whole thing that's become like a company, because in companies, obviously, we care very much about customer satisfaction. And it seems like these students are under the impression that they are the new customers and what they're buying from us is a degree. So
Yes.
we are not making it possible for them to get their degree, then we have somehow harmed them. And so now we need to be held accountable. And so that's what happens when we have to constantly send out these evaluation forms where we take them so seriously now, where it's essentially the case that students now get to tell us what we need to teach. So I'm not kidding, because at SOAS in England, they were telling the student feedback was taken so seriously, they were telling them that they wanted to scrap all Western philosophers from their curriculum. So this is the whole like decolonized education movement, where students are now trying to dictate to lecturers what material they are comfortable with being taught. And because we're the lecturers and this is a business, we need to make good on this experience that they now think is their right. And it certainly doesn't resemble the world that I come from, where my experiences were rarely considered, if ever. And I did not believe that I was there to buy a degree. I didn't believe that my fees went towards buying my degree.
It's
What are your thoughts?
actually the what for me was sad when the discussions around decolonization happened was that, at least in my field, for instance, there are so many intrinsic aspects to mathematics and science that come from Africa, but they're so much a part of what we teach now that they were assumed to be Western, and they're not. They came originally from Africa. They came through trade, they came from many places, but not the West. And it was literally pulling together all these different kinds of knowledge that led to where we are now. So the assumption that what we are teaching is Western through its origin, for me it was sad, because it's based upon what investigation? I actually did go and investigate, and also I've done history and I've done philosophy. So the claim made that we need to remove all because it's Western, where was the evidence? And this is the kind of thing that needs to be happening in an educational environment, where if you want to do something like that, you bring this idea. That's great. Now let's interrogate it. Let's take it apart. Let's assess it. Let's see if we're right. Are we wrong? We might be right here, but here we got it wrong a little bit. And that's the notion. That's the idea. That's what we're supposed to be striving for. And when this opportunity presented itself, we didn't do that. We didn't do that at all. We didn't interrogate whether this claim was based upon fact. Was it based upon actual understanding of historically where the knowledge that we're currently engaging with comes from? And for me, that was unfortunate. It was an opportunity I felt that didn't really go well. And instead, what it did was it created the impression that at this point, everybody gets to dictate to academics how they must do their job, except the academics.
Yeah.
And the loss in there was a huge after those different kinds of events that transpired around that time. It very much changed the landscape of higher education and how academics interacted with their students, how so many different components functioned in the classroom. And yeah, so unfortunately, it's now one of the things that in my mind was an opportunity. But yeah, it didn't actually pan out that way.
So when students pay their university fees, what are they paying for? What are they getting?
So usually the standard fee comes down to basic costs. It doesn't cover everything by a long shot. So it used to be back in the day when we didn't do everything online. It used to be notes. It used to be lab equipment. It used to be lab space. It used to be all the costs that are involved with that, which also requires technicians extensively. This is in my field. And in many of the sciences, this is the case. Then, of course, there are the administrators, the academics. I mean, there's a lot that goes into one person's education. It's not it's not simple, and the costs are quite complicated as well. But what unfortunately happened is that as government funds started being pulled, those fees that were required from students and in many universities across the world had to increase quite drastically. And so what universities then try to do, as you would if you were looking at this from a very skewed capitalist perspective in my mind, is you would increase your intake because you get funding for the amount of students from government that you take in. And so that's what you do, you increase your intake. But that then has other ramifications. And look, increasing intake, aside from the fact that it created the impression that a university degree is what you need, it also then led to a whole set of other scarce skills. So like on the scarce skills list in South Africa is like carpenters, joiners, welders. Those are scarce skills. Yeah. You don't get that from going to university though. So, but we're taking people that would have done that and would have probably done it really well, and we're pushing them towards an education system that can't create those individuals. So we've basically set up a system where we're creating more individuals with better qualifications, and we're creating scarce skills everywhere else. And often, to be honest with you, because it's not the appropriate environment, those individuals literally get stuck in the system and they don't necessarily have somewhere to go for a variety of different reasons. So I've spoken to many parents over the years, and I remember one mother I spoke to, and she said to me, now his son is extremely good with anything electronic. Like he can just build something from scratch, like amazing. And he thought of studying electrical engineering. And he just realized when he started that it was too intellectual for him. It wasn't what he wanted. And he, in fact, then actually went into a more technical job, and he flourished. He excelled. because that was the kind of education he needed to support his talent, which is different. And I think that's for me become a bit of a problem when we talk about this commercialized concept around education, is that university is basically being seen as the solution to all. So it's a one model. So and that's the model that's going to help us gain the scarce skills that we need. But it doesn't work like that. It's every educational platform is meant to support your development through what is your actual talents, your interests. It's not meant to create a talent from nothing.
Yeah.
I can't be a doctor. I don't have the skills. I just don't have interest. But the force me to sit through a degree like that, I would never finish. There's no chance. And what have we done is we've created this huge imbalance because we've, as you were saying previously, the students are buying degrees. That's not what you are buying. You are buying the opportunity to gain an education. The degree is like the little tag at the end of it. All right, it's the thing that you need to show. It's supposed to be the evidence of what you gained. It's not the thing you gained, though. What you gained is the opportunity to obtain an education. No one's going to give you an education. It's not possible for you to be given an education. You can only earn an education.
See the ramifications of that now, because you can bump marks and you can give people their degrees to say, oh, okay, look, you paid the fees, here's your piece of paper. But it doesn't mean those students have the skills they need, so they're not contributing to the economy. And in the humanities, it's even worse because we all have students who believe that it's fine as long as they get a degree, it's okay, even though they have a mediocre BA degree, which means nothing. No one cares if you have a mediocre BA. You may as well not have gone to university, okay? Because there are a gazillion of you out there. Your skills mean nothing.
The biggest lie.
Because they bought their degree, they should be hired. And they're not. They're shocked. And it's not, I mean, partly it's the fact that the government has set them up to believe that we've created a market, we're going to push you through that market, and then you're going to have a job at the end of it. And they don't.
The thing is the biggest lie is the idea that if you have a mediocre science degree, you'll be fine. No, you won't. Because there'll be a top humanities student that got 90% in fields like philosophy, English lit, and Goldman Sachs will hire them and not you. Because they're smart, they're talented, and they're driven. And you have an average science degree. And that's the reality. When companies search, they don't necessarily even look at what you studied. They want to see, how did you perform? How did you engage with your studies? And when they interview you, did you actually come out capable of being a critical thinker? Are you able to take what you've learned, apply it? And in this age of constant learning, can you teach yourself? So if I need you to go learn how to do data analysis on a random data set, can you go do that? And the thing is that somebody that isn't from the mathematical sciences, who is very intelligent, very driven, yes, they can do that. And that's the thing. The biggest problem I've had with science students and engineering students as well, a lot of the time, because those are scarce skills. They have an arrogance that comes with that, to think that as long as they get the degree, even if it takes them a decade, it's fine, they will get it, they will get a job. And it's not the case, though. Companies are looking for bright, talented individuals. And they know that these days, with all the resources available online, people can teach themselves what they need to learn. And they're taking advantage of that. So the education system is not what it might have been once upon a time, where you had access to knowledge that you were then providing to students. That's not what we do anymore. People can find the exact same resources that we have online very easily.
Yeah.
The point is that we are there to teach you what to do with that. So now you have this information. How do you turn that into knowledge? How do you turn that into something that will be valuable to you or to your employer? That is what we are trying to teach you.
actually, there are a lot of people who now actually think that universities have become redundant precisely because of that, because there's so much information that's online. They don't actually even see the point of academics or universities anymore because they go, well, I can go get the information online. But clearly, it's not that simple. You still need people who are experts in their field who can actually translate that knowledge in a way that you can actually access it, first of all, so you can actually assimilate that. And then secondly, so that you can actually figure out what to do with it. And also the other part of the academic world, which people don't seem to understand, is that academics are not just there to teach, they are actually there to do research and to further their fields. So that's the innovation and the like developing their own expertise part of it.
Yes.
And people don't usually understand that part of it. But anyway, we've talked about the student experience, the admin layer that's growing, the fact that, well, in my case, lecturers have to sell their degrees. We have to constantly be able to sell to students why they should take our courses. And as far as I can tell, they've done a pretty poor job of it. And the whole purpose of the system now is to get bums on seats. It's not about quality education. It's just about we need to get more people to come to universities, even though we can't offer them what they need. So how do we combat this? How do we like go about it in a different way so that we don't have to have this commercialization model anymore because it's just destroying any quality education that we could have hoped for?
So, look, in my mind, one of the main problems that we're facing is the fact that is exactly what you were saying. Our technicons were basically elevated to universities, which is problematic. Vocational training colleges or even apprenticeship structures, those have basically faded. They don't function nearly as effectively as they should, and that's causing huge issues in the educational sector. And just as importantly, our teacher training colleges, because they got swallowed up by universities in many instances, they're now competing for resources. Whereas previously, because they stood alone, they had their own resources and they were focused only on training teachers. And that was one of the strengths of our education system, in my mind, was the fact that they weren't having to compete with any other kind of department for resources because they were singular and they had a purpose, and their purpose kind of was the foundation of everything else that is happening in education. What's happened in my mind with a lot of the commercialization that we've seen is, so there's obviously, I mean, online platforms for education has just expanded astronomically with positives and negatives on either side. But we've also seen that in industry, many companies now have their own platforms to educate. So they basically take in students and they have their own platforms that they put these students through so that they educated in the way that this company needs them to be. So they either have internships or they have graduate programs, or there are many different kinds of forms. I even know of some companies who have literally taken on, in essence, adult educational specialists to come in, not just educate internally as they need upgrading and skills development, but to literally have a standard graduate program that everybody in the company goes through as they step in, to basically make sure that everybody's skills is where they need it. And also it's a means of assessment. They then don't have to completely rely on whatever degree or whatever marks they get from the university. They can then assess for themselves, is this individual the kind of person they want? Do they fit into the company strategy? Do they fit into the company, basically the environment? Does it fit? So there are many different kinds of factors. And so they're already starting to say, well, we will take this on board. Mm-hmm. In my mind, that's not ideal, mainly because you would in essence then have to start your own little university to support that kind of structure. For me, there's a reason why people are educators. It's because it's what they train to do. They know their field, and it means that they don't just know their field in an insular fashion. They're aware often of what is happening in industry, in other academic programs, what are skills, scarce skills shortages, all of those kinds of things. They're aware of that. So in my mind, one of the reasons why, so certain entities that have developed now are research institutes. And I think one of the reasons why they're starting to develop is specifically to take further this educational program. So a lot of those institutes will have higher degree programs, especially postgraduate programs that they're offering. And those institutes often more and more, they end up being completely financially independent. So they basically get funded from outside, either through grants, through other educational agencies, or through industry, or through their own labor, because many of the researchers, they often consult or engage in other kinds of work. And that's how they end up funding themselves, basically. And then they have educational programs. In my mind, what you want, and this is an ideal, is that you want a research institute structured like that, strong enough financially to take in students based upon their abilities. So you would have, for instance, an entrance exam, which has been discussed back and forth many times. It's not easy to do, specifically to take into account a variety of different backgrounds, languages. It's not easy. But the idea is, for me, what I would want is to find the talent, and it's everywhere. I have met students who have come from strangest backgrounds, and they just have this burgeoning talent, and it's just the most amazing thing to witness. And the students that are meant to be in your field, you want to find them. You don't care where they come from, whether it's a student sitting in Sandton or whether it's a student that's sitting in Klipprivier, it doesn't matter. The point is, you want to find those individuals that this is their talent, this is their ability, and you want to invest in that. You want to invest long term. So if you could set up a research institute capable of funding those students, so fully funding them, I'd be very interested to see how successful those individuals would be once they left. And for me, that's a possibility.
I mean, I think it's just ironic that we've come up with this understanding of how education is actually starting to play out. And a big part of the problem for how this commercialized model has gained traction is the very fact that it's getting funding from the government. But the government is the reason why we have to take in a certain number of students. We have to have a certain pass rate because we have to meet these quotas. And the government that claims that it's in a lot of ways anti-capitalist is actually the reason why we've now created a system that is so like business orientated that we have to now try and think of ways that we can decouple ourselves from the government so that we can actually have our own standards and try and actually generate a system that still has quality to it. Is like blows my mind that this is where we are, because you'd think that with their belief system and their socialist agenda, they would, wouldn't you actually be all that happy feeding a system that literally looks like a business, looks like we are a freaking company just trying to get bums on seats and trying to, get in the cash and give them their degree so they can say that they got what they paid for.
But I think that's for me I think this is where for me for me capitalism is based upon rational self-interest. And when I look at the system, I think business, that's exactly what it is. Because I don't see a capitalist system because I don't see rational self-interest. I see a very irrational understanding of education, of what it means to invest in education, and what the outcome is of quality education. The outcome of quality education is not people with university degrees. It's individuals that are skilled and that have ideals and that can critically interrogate and think in any field. All right. One of the things that I miss the most when I travel is how practical and how focused on problem solving South Africans are. If I get somebody in to come and fix something in my house, if they don't know what to do, a South African will sit there and they will think it through, and the kinds of creative ways in which they will come up with fixing things. I've watched builders, I've watched people, electricians, the most creative things they will come up with. And I'm just always, every time I'm just like, I love this country for that. And in exactly the same way, our doctors are also being extremely inventive. They're also pushing boundaries. And for me, that's the South African mindset, is that ability to solve problems. And that's who we are trying to produce. We're trying to produce individuals that in their life, they can take what they've learned, adapt it, change it, and move it forward. That's what we're looking at. It's not the degree. We don't need the university degree. There are people that are more useful in society and they've never stepped foot into any kind of formal educational platform.
I think also it's worth clarifying that when we talk about the elite, what we're talking about is the smartest and most people with the most potential. We're not talking about the most affluent people. We're trying to find the people that we know actually become the thought leaders tomorrow.
Yes.
And
often those are not people that are affluent, because people that, usually the students that perform best for us, they have grit, they have determination, and they want that education. And those are the students that excel. Those are the students that end up getting a PhD in my field and walk across the stage. Those are the students that want it, because to them it's that valuable. They're not the students that had it easier. Most of the time they didn't. But it's exactly that quality, that ability to take whatever life throws at them and figure it out and not give up. I remember sitting outside a lecturer's office for, I think it was 3 or 4 hours, because I had one question. And I was going to get that answer no matter what it did to me or to her. I was going to get that answer. But those are the kinds of students that they drive you crazy, but you love them, because those are the people that are going to change things.
Yeah. Well, I think one conclusion we've come to is that the government is really shit at running a business, as usual. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Let me just put myself up here. Hello, everyone. All right. So once again, awesome episode. Very fascinating, very interesting. A lot of people in the comments saying and agreeing with what you guys are saying. There wasn't a lot of questions, but we had one come up now. Marnus Vanderberg, thank you so much, Marnus, for tuning in and watching. A question for the guest. As a professor, still having ties to university, don't you think that what you are saying now might influence your professional life in a negative way? And it continues, if so or not, do you think that more teaching professors should speak in terms of which you speak about? That some people will do better off going to a place other than university?
So in terms of the first component of your question, I'd be amazed to see if anybody from my profession is listening.
No, for real. No, yeah, no.
So would it influence my academic professional life? Maybe, but from what I've seen, people like avoiding things that are uncomfortable. So it's not that likely to happen. It depends. At the end of the day, I think it matters more that I actually say something. I've had students walk through my corridors psychologically broken because they have tried again and again and again to get a degree, a university degree. I've had students that have good jobs in industry that literally will come in after 7, 8 years to try and get a degree. Why? I don't know. They're already excelling in their field. And it's buy-in. It's buy-in into an idea that value comes from this piece of paper. And the reality is yes, in many forums, you do need that, you need that name. It needs to say BSc in this or BA in that. But that also needs to change. It's not based upon your value as you and your skills is not necessarily represented by a degree. And there are many ways for you to be able to actually excel, to perform well, to grow and develop your talent. In South Africa especially, I've seen people that have made the most amazing contributions, and they have never touched a formal system of education. And so for me, when I see a student psychologically beat themselves because they feel that they have to get this degree, especially when they're already doing well in their chosen industry, it's horrible. It's the worst thing in the world to see.
Honestly, if I had a kid now, I wouldn't tell them to go to university. I wouldn't encourage them at all. I'd just be like, it's a waste of your time. Find another way.
It's not just that, like it depends on what you want to do. My daughter is interested in becoming a hairdresser. I was like, great, you'll earn more than me. Let's go for it. Because this is the thing. Like if that's what she loves to do, then there must be some things, there must be a way. She's already actually asked her hairdresser to teach her how to do it. Wow. And I said to her, well, that's the way. Apprentice.
Yeah.
An apprentice system existed for who knows how, for a reason. Because you gain that. One of the things that can often be lost through a formal education system is what people refer to as implicit knowledge. It's that knowledge that an expert has from having done something for 30 years. And they can't explain it verbally, but if you work with them, they can transfer it. And that's invaluable.
Yeah. All right, so we have another question. I'm going to, okay, so this is more of a philosophy question. Maybe I should leave it for, okay, let me ask this question. I don't know if this person is being sarcastic. I don't mean any offense, by the way. I can't tell when it's typing. I can't tell. But I'm going to ask it. How do you find a job if you are a pessimist, bipolar, no skills, and have been a couch potato for the last decade? How do you convince people to give you a job?
So I all of those things you listed, except couch potato. And I became an academic. I'm like, the thing is that, so there are ways. How do you convince somebody to give you a job if you've been a couch potato? My first question would be, why were you a couch potato? Everything else is fine. You can use that to your advantage. You can just say you're quirky. But in my mind, you have to show that you can bring something. So, like for instance, in one of the things I like about my sister's field is that as a copywriter, they often ask for your portfolio. They want to see what you've done. So, and in many fields, that's actually what they're leaning towards. Like now, even in my field, you have to have a GitHub page because your code is to be up there. So they literally ask you for your CV and they ask you for your link and they go check your code. And that's your portfolio. And so many fields are leaning towards this. So couch potato.
Yeah, and also like, I mean, I had to switch from being in philosophy, which no one understands. I mean, no one knows what your skill set is. And I had to try and then start a career from scratch. And literally, I could explain it, but if you're not an academic, it's not going to mean much to you. So I had to figure out a way to, and honestly, I started just by doing a lot of part-time gigs that were not permanent jobs, but were basically just ways for me to get connections and to then build myself up from that. And most people don't want to hear that because they don't want to hear that it's going to take them that long to do short little, once-off stints and things like that because it's hard work. But that honestly is the only way. You have to start somewhere. And if whatever job you can get, you do it and you build on that. There's no other way. I know I say this now, but I mean, look, I know with COVID and everything, it's easy to say that. Really... I mean, I know it's horrible out there, but I'm just saying that I don't think a lot of the time when you tell people what it took for you to do something, they don't want to do that thing. They want a quick answer to that, and they want a solution, and there isn't one.
All right. Well, fair question and good answers. I hope that helps someone. All right, so this is the philosophical question. I feel it's a bit philosophical. So Kat is asking, she says, question from me, is there freedom of speech?
Is there freedom of speech in the academy?
She says you're taking Prof. Natras as an example. I don't know if you guys know Prof. Natras as an example, i.e., are we still an open society?
Oh, no, no. I mean, look, I would say from Shrees, you can answer from your perspective within the academy now. I'm answering from my perspective from when I was, and more recently when I was in South Africa in the academy. I would say we're more free in South Africa than we are anywhere else in terms of
That's
freedom of. So in terms of what you can say, I think we're freer here. That's why I came back than anywhere else. But I don't think we're free because there's even in when I was working, I'm not going to name the university, but even when I was working in university, when I came back from Canada, I couldn't speak freely, and I knew that I couldn't speak freely. Um, so you had to watch who you spoke to, and you could speak freely to certain people, but not to others. So in that respect, in the academy, no, but I would say working in industry, I can speak more freely than I could in the academy. That's my answer.
so. I think in the context of the academy, it can be very field dependent. I must be honest. So in my field, I've been lucky. I have been surrounded predominantly by people where I could speak my mind. Um, I also just did anyway, but I was lucky. I didn't experience overwhelming backlash when I gave my opinion. And even if I was the only one, I was still lucky enough to be able to be in an environment where many academics were still extremely passionate about what they did, and they were still willing to fight the good fight. And I've been very lucky in that regard. And I actually found an interest in industry in turn. I had to hold back a bit more because um, intellectually I couldn't be as harsh. I had to be softer, if that makes sense. So I think it's very much, it does depend on the field, it depends on where you're at. But overall, I must be honest, I find that in South Africa, um, we are more free. Like we are able to, it's not just expressing thoughts, it's expressing emotions, expressing what you are feeling. That for me often has been more suppressed in other countries. And in South Africa is so easily accepted most of the time. And that's the one thing I think is really beautiful about this country.
I just got so Kat explained who Professor Natras is, Nattras. Professor Natras had a few papers. Okay, so they had a few papers, and then UCT denied her papers released. She said not enough black people have entered into the bioscientific field, and they denied her methodology. That's who she is.
So she's not black, and they denied her entry because there weren't enough.
That part is unclear if she is black or not. But she wrote a paper saying that there was not enough black people who entered the bioscientific field.
Oh, okay. And the paper was denied.
Yeah, they denied her methodology.
Yeah, they said that her methodology was faulty. But this is the point that you've raised before, Dioné. In an academic forum, the university shouldn't be stepping in and doing that. Somebody else should be writing a research article and then explaining why it is that it was a bad article to begin with.
Exactly. I mean, they have to have their own standards for what they find acceptable. If they can't motivate it beyond, I mean, this is like, I'm just going to remind people, this was the Rebecca Tuvel thing where they wanted paper to be scrapped, and they also accused her of improper scholarship. They couldn't pinpoint what it was that she'd done improperly. It was probably because of the conclusion she came to that they didn't like. And that's not, I suppose that's also why Kat's commenting on the free society bit. It's not a free society if even the academic institutions have no level of objectivity. And this is what we were mentioning before about the politicization of the academy. The moment that the academy becomes politicized, it starts screening what it's going to let into its journals, what it's going to be allow into its teaching curriculum. And that's when things get even more distorted because it's supposed to be a neutral space. It's not supposed to be a space where you reject things based on the political persuasion.
I must be honest. I mean, there is a lot of, there's also a lot of very sloppy intellectual work that's developed. I mean, it's like that everywhere in any field.
Yeah.
And the thing is the problem with current media is that the moment that you have any kind of title or you claim anything that is controversial or that might, like, create some kind of scandal, it's out there in a split second. So without the actual community having interrogated it, gone through it, thought about it, there's been an actual intellectual process where it's been interrogated, it immediately goes out into the public and it creates the scandal. Whereas I don't know about the article. I don't know if it was a good article or not. But at the end of the day, it's literally like having when you meet someone, having your first thought immediately out there, and you're not allowed to adjust your thoughts thereafter. And that's just kind of unfortunately how things work now.
Yeah, so sorry. I mean, we don't know about that case. I think we'd have
sorry.
to be able to give like a definitive. Sorry.
That's all right. She commented, so I was letting you guys know. All right, cool. Well, there's no other questions, so we can wrap up.
Okay, great. Shrees, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I hope that people got something out of it at least and started understanding a bit more clearly how the academy works at the moment and what's flawed about it. And then also like the thing I mentioned at the end that the government sucks at running businesses. I hope that point sunk in because that's a very important point. So like just keep that in your head. Don't forget that point.
I think the point that for me is what I would like to have out there is that don't let what's happening in the educational system make you believe that South Africans aren't talented, intelligent, and can go all the way, because they do.
Yeah.
The people in this country are amazing. So don't let what's happening in the educational system make you believe that anybody in this country is in any way inferior. Given what we are having to manage, it's amazing that we have students sitting in Oxford, MIT, any top university you can name, we have South Africans sitting there. We have South Africans working across the world because, yes, as a nation, we can reach the stars. So I think that for me is important. But yeah, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Dioné.
And to support that, I just want to say yes, I've taught in 2 other countries, and I can tell you, we are not inferior in any way. In fact, I actually think that those students are inferior. So,
Yes.
And this is first world country. So, yeah, absolutely, we have the potential. That's not the problem. Anyway, thank you, Cherise. Thank you so much, Joe, for supporting us in our conversation. And I hope you guys leave comments and please share this conversation with other people you think might see some value in it, especially around the education issue. I think it's important for people to know what's going on. And yeah, I hope you join me in another fortnight. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Hey guys, so if you enjoyed the show, please consider giving it a like and a share. Don't forget to subscribe as well if you're new to my channel. And if you really enjoyed the content, feel free to join and become a member. Don't forget about my fight against cancel culture. That's in the link in the description below. Support my fight against cancel culture. Go to that link and all the information is there. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching.